Good morning. I'm just going to give us a couple minutes to make sure everyone is able to join. I see my participant number climbing up. Welcome, welcome. All right, welcome everyone. So my name is Maisie. I am an educator here at the Milwaukee Public Museum, and I am so excited to be joined by very cool, awesome, super nice guy, and also NASA Astronaut Raja Chari. Yes, we're super excited to have him, and we're really excited to have you joining us as well. So just a couple housekeeping notes so that we're all on the same page. Like I said on the registration form, this is targeted towards grades 1 through 5. Anyone is allowed to join. So even if you're not in grades 1 through 5, we are super happy to have you. But it's best suited for that. And I also want to let us know we are super excited to have you guys ask questions. So if you would like to ask questions, if you are connecting to us via Zoom, then you can use our Q&A section, and I will make sure to monitor that. If you are connecting to us via YouTube, you can use that chat function. You might have to log into YouTube to use the chat function, but we'll be monitoring both, and we can make sure that you can have all of your questions answered. So I'm going to turn it on over to our amazing astronaut, Raja, and he is going to tell you a little bit about himself and about what he does.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Maisie, and thanks very much for everyone tuning in. My plan today is to talk a little bit. I'll give you a really quick background of where I'm from, and then show a video, and I'll talk through the video. That's a video from our mission. So I was on the space station from November of 2021 to May of this year, so about 6 months. And so that video will kind of help explain what life is like and what we do up there. And then we'll have a lot of time for questions and answers, which is the exciting time. So let me show you a quick picture that you guys might recognize. We'll see if anyone can pick out what's what. You might be able to cheat because I had some labels on there. So this is Wisconsin from space. This was this past winter when I was up there. So you can see I'm sitting down here. If you can see my mouse down in Milwaukee. This is Lake Michigan, the coast of Lake Michigan. So I was born in Milwaukee, actually. My dad had come here, which I'll show you in the next few slides. So I'd like to talk a little bit about why I am who I am. So I have 3 really important parts of my life. So I kind of, just like a stool, they have to stay in balance. So I have my country that I'm really proud of, and then I serve. I have my family that's super important, and I have my faith that's important. I try to keep all those things in balance, and it's kind of hard, especially if you're, as you're an elementary school kid, it's kind of hard to keep track of everything going on in your life, and unfortunately, it gets harder. And so the way I wound up being an astronaut here in the upper right. So my dad was from India. He moved to Wisconsin to get his master's degree. And fortunately for me, he met my mom, who lived in Wisconsin. So she was from Manitowoc, and my mom's side of the family is all from Manitowoc and Milwaukee. So they met in Milwaukee, and that's where I was born. And so that worked out pretty good for me that he came here, and loved being back in Milwaukee. So I was in the Air Force before I was in NASA. I still am technically in the Air Force, but I work for NASA now. And I can answer lots of questions about how I wound up transitioning and the process and all that. But I want to jump right into showing the video, and I'm going to talk while I show it. So we made this to kind of show the highlights of what we do on orbit. So let me bring that up. All right, and here we go. So I was part of what's called the Crew 3 mission. That was the 4 of us on Crew 3. So there's 3 U.S. astronauts, myself, Tom, and Caleb Barron, and then Matthias Maurer, who's a German astronaut from NASA. So 3 of us, those 3 of us are in there in the video. Matthias, Caleb, and I, that was our first space flight. And then for Tom, it was his 3rd space flight. He had been on a shuttle and then a Soyuz, which is the Russian rocket. So before we fly, we spend a lot of time training and getting ready not only to run the systems on the space station, but also for the experiments we're going to wind up doing on the station. And so this is a virtual reality training. Right when we got up there, we had to do a spacewalk to fix an antenna. And Tom and Kayla had to do the spacewalk, and Matthias and I had to run the robotic arm. We also used the T-38 trainer as a way to work on our crew coordination. And so Tom and I were the people flying the Dragon capsule. And so we used the T-38 to practice being able to quickly make decisions while the aircraft is moving and talk to each other and know what the other person is thinking. So we use that to help train so we're ready in space. We also train on the ground for spacewalks. And so we have this huge pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. It's one of the biggest pools in the world. And the entire space station is underwater in that pool.
I was able to reach the TA clamps closest to the NZGLs though, so those are released on my side. Copy.
And so we practice what we're going to do in space in the pool. The other place we do a lot of practice training is in the simulator, and that we have a vehicle that looks very much like the inside of the actual spacecraft that we use out in California. When it's actually time for launch, this is the suit up room. So the day of launch, we start about 4 to 5 hours before the actual launch time. And so in this room, they're checking out the pressure of the suits. These are the suits we wear in the spacecraft, in the SpaceX vehicle. Once they've pressure checked all the suits, you can see the countdown clock in the top left. It's about 3.5 hours prior to launch now, and we start heading out to the launch pad. This is at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and so all the U.S. rockets, even back to like Mercury days, the first rockets, the Apollo rockets, the space shuttle, we launched those out of Kennedy Space Center in Florida. At that point, we drive to the rocket. We actually get in the rocket, which is capsule at the top of this giant rocket. We get in about 3 hours before we launch, and it takes that long. You'll see once we go across this big arm, which is where we're standing there, then people help us strap in on the top of the rocket, and then it takes a bunch of time because they have to then close the hatch, check all the outside, pressurize it. There's a whole bunch of checks, and all those people in black outfits are there helping us. You can see we're about 2.5 hours prior to launch now. Next thing you'll do is they'll actually, once they've got us in the rocket, they'll start rotating the seats up. And the reason we do that is because we want to be facing straight up when the rocket launches. And the fork is basically, as you're going up, all pushes through your chest. So it's kind of like someone sitting on your chest, or a really heavy person sitting on your chest while you're launching.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff.
Copy. One laboratory in orbit, the International Space Station. Vehicle is pitching downrange.
That's being built on the left, called the vehicle assembly building. That's where they build the rocket. We can take them out of there and wheel them out. There's 2 stages to the rocket. The first stage gets about as high as an airplane, and the second stage, that first stage falls off back to Earth. The second stage then comes the rest of the way. This is the point now. This is about 7 minutes after launch, and so it's pretty amazing that only about 8 minutes after we've taken off, we're in space. This is what's called a separation. So the rocket is disconnecting from the capsule.
Dragon, CE, welcome to orbit. Hope you enjoyed the ride from S9. Dragon will take you from here. Safe travels.
One thing we have is people have probably heard of Mission Control Houston or Houston.
And Kayla, give us 5 10 minutes.
And then in,
get you updated
since we're
timeline.
running
Now
a
we know
SpaceX
our
rocket,
final
there's also
altitude
Mission
and the
Control
color
in Hawthorne. So there's 2 mission controls.
Good evening, Europe. Guten Abend, Deutschland. This is Endurance, Crew Dragon 3. We're flying currently along Italy, heading towards Northern Europe. On the left side is Germany. We would like to show you this from the space view, but it's night and dark. But we just saw a few minutes ago our final destination, the International Space Station, floating in space and shining like a diamond, only 30 kilometers forward of us. And that was such an emotional moment. We all felt very thrilled, very excited, and we can't wait to arrive there in a few hours.
So the job of the capsule is to get us to the space station.
Turns on the big loop, crew visors are down, and looks like a good alignment. You've got our stamp of approval to continue.
And then my job is to dock it to the space station. So that's the target I'm looking at that we've got a display. And that's the view from the space station of what the
docking sequence is complete. Welcome to the International Space Station.
We are really excited to see Mark. So Mark Vandehei is the guy in the gray shirt there. He did a year-long mission.
NASA astronaut Caleb Barron.
And we were there with him for this
and you can hear the claps inside Mission Control. Next up is European Space Agency astronaut Matthias Maurer.
To control your body, so
and now we have NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn.
You see, like I'm flying out of here pretty fast because it's hard to control your momentum.
and NASA astronaut Raja Chari.
So that was our group of 7 as what we called Expedition 66 on the space station. And so we were there for about 6 months. And that's the outside of the station. So it's a huge space station. It's about as big as a football field. The part that we live in is like a 5-bedroom house. So and then what we do on the station is mostly science. That's our job. The reason we're there is it's a giant orbiting laboratory. And so anything that we can test in microgravity where there's weightlessness, that's what we do up there. So we have these freezers where we can put samples, like when we take blood or do experiments, we freeze them so they can bring them back down to Earth later and have scientists on the ground. Matthias is working on a thing that spins plants at different speeds to look at how plants can grow in space. These are experiments where we're trying to figure out how your eyes and your ears and your senses work so that people who are in accidents on the ground, sometimes they have to retrain their brain how to work with disabilities. And that was some of the experiments we're doing. We also did a lot of plant research. And so we're trying to figure out better ways to grow plants in space, because if we go to live on the moon or eventually go to Mars, we need to bring our own food with us and learn how to grow it. We can't pack everything. We need to be able to grow it there. We do a lot of research on ourselves. So I was showing how we take our own blood. This is research on robots that fly around the space station. We also do research on fire, which it seems can be kind of dangerous. So we have to be really careful to keep the fire contained, because fire doesn't go up like it does on the ground. It's in a ball, and that ball of fire floats around. But we can do really cool materials research and try to figure out different ways of blending materials in space that we can't do on the ground. We have these giant glove boxes. So a lot of the things you do that would hurt people or be toxic, you have to keep inside a box. And so just like a lab on Earth, you put your gloves on, you go inside this box and work on it inside there, so it's not floating around in the cabin. This is our favorite spot of the space station, which is called the cupola. It's a window that looks down on the Earth. It's sort of like a window maybe in your house, except this one looks down to the space station. And this is definitely everyone's favorite spot of the space station. This is some research we were doing on Matthias. So you can see Kayla's actually testing out his eye pressure. And that's another thing that has to do with, so people, some of the effects that happen to us on the Earth when we get older and our eyes change, same thing happens in space. And so this is a way to test that in space. This was skin cell research. And then you can see another kind of glove box. So we have lots of different glove boxes that we use. The way we get stuff to and from the stations, we need food and water, supplies, are these cargo vehicles. So there's different kinds of cargo vehicles. There's these Russian ones that come up that give us, that bring us food and supplies. And this is kind of the screen you see when it's docking. That's how so we actually have to learn to speak Russian to be able to patrol those vehicles. You saw in the training, we were practicing for spacewalks. We actually did 3 spacewalks while we were up there. So Kayla and Tom did a spacewalk to fix an antenna. And then Kayla and I did a spacewalk to add new solar panels to the space station. And then Matthias and I did a spacewalk to add better cooling to the space station. So all the stuff we're doing on spacewalks, it's kind of like you're fixing your house. You're outside doing repairs on your house, except it's a pretty cool place to be working. And this is a view. We use that arm, I was explaining, that robotic arm to move people and things around. And so Tom and I rode that arm around on the space station. During the day, when we're not doing science, we also have to exercise. And so this is the weight machine we have, and you can do all the different kinds of exercises you would do on the ground, except in space. The treadmill is actually on the wall, but to you work on the walls and the ceiling, so it doesn't actually seem like it's sideways. We have to do haircuts in space. I had to learn how to cut Kayla's hair. I went to her barber on the ground to learn how to do that. This is where Matthias's hygiene area was. And then once a week, we would get together with everyone and have a group meal. And so that was always a fun time, because we would try, people would bring different foods. The food's pretty good, but it does get boring. So after a few weeks, you've had all the different food. And so it's fun to try sample some special food that other people have brought up with them. So I showed those vehicles that go and come. Those vehicles also bring new people to the station. So while we were there, 3 new Russians came. We also spent Christmas up there, so you can see Kayla had presents for the whole crew, and we had some holiday caps. We also made Christmas cookies, but in space you can actually make the frosting go up and down. which is pretty cool. So we had some fun making 3-dimensional Christmas cookies. When you're eating, you can be upside down or on the wall, so it doesn't really matter. And the Russians had spacewalks as well. And so you can see this is a time lapse, but you can see them moving around. We actually added a whole new module to the Russian segment, and they went out and did a spacewalk to attach it. This is a vehicle that we have supplies, but this one we have to grab with the arm. So I mentioned we use the robotic arm. So Kayla and I are flying the arm. You're gonna see it moving here in a second. But we reach out into space and grab the vehicle with the arm and then pull it back to the space station and attach it to the space station. You can also have a lot of fun in space. So the thing I miss the most is the floating around and some super strong exercises when you don't weigh anything. And you can even throw people and play catch. Even if you don't have a ball to play with, you can find a friend and throw them around. So this was Kayla and I's spacewalk. Like I said, we went out to work on the solar arrays. And so Kayla's there working on getting the supplies out. And you can see the beautiful view behind us. So it's pretty cool to be working and being able to look down and see the Earth moving below you. This was the next Russian crew to show up. And so when they showed up, it was actually time for us to pretty quickly start getting ready to go back. So Mark Van de Heij, who was there for a whole year, so he's the longest US person who's been in space, went home when those Russians showed up. And then Matthias and I did the third spacewalk. This is when I was saying that we worked to improve the cooling of the space station. And then we sent Mark home. And so this is us saying bye to them, and then we closed their hatch. They undocked, that's their Soyuz vehicle. And then we welcomed out another crew. So the space station is kind of like there's a big traffic jam up there. Lots of vehicles constantly going and coming to and from the space station. But unfortunately, our mission eventually had to come to an end. We welcomed crew 4, so I was crew 3. Crew 4 was the crew that replaced us. So once they showed up, we spent a few days kind of going over how things work, some training, and then we passed off control of the space station to them, and then it was time for us to get ready to go home. So it had been about 6 months. It went by really, really fast, and we wish we could have stayed. And we had a little time to play around in our spacesuits before we got in. We got suited a few minutes early, so had some time. You can see all the stuff, all those boxes down there. The space station is full of things. Every nook and cranny is full of supplies or spare parts or trash, because we have to use every available spot we have. So we've been on the station now for 6 months, and time to get ready to come back home. So we're setting up the vehicle here. We sit in the same configuration as we did on the launch. And once we're ready, we close the hatch, we pressurize the vehicle, and then we disconnect from the space station and start working our way back down towards Earth.
All hooks open and nominal.
So that's the view from the station, watching our Endurance vehicle leave. The nose cone is open right now, but that closes before we come back down into Earth. And the way it works is we fall back to the Earth and slow down, and we have a heat shield on the bottom of the spacecraft that helps slow us down, and we land in the water with parachutes. It was kind of sad coming back because we knew this is the last time we're going to see the Earth in that view. Those little yellow sparks are what's called plasma. So when you're coming down, you're slowing down so fast that it's like a sparkler outside the window. It's very beautiful.
Copy, we see the same.
So there's 2 parachutes that slow us down.
SpaceX Dragon, we see 4 chutes, and we could distinctly feel the 2 disc reefs. It looks like simultaneous generates.
Yeah, that reefing action that you just mentioned, playing out right in front of us.
And Raja, we see the same.
And those are the 4 main parachutes. And then what happens is once we splash down, the parachutes detach.
All right, as you can see there on your screen, Dragon Endurance carrying crew 3.
Copy, we see the same, and main attack.
Crew 3 has splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Florida. So right now, Dragon is
On behalf of the entire SpaceX team, welcome home. Willkommen auf der Erde. It's been an absolute honor to support you on your mission, Endurance crew, and thanks for flying SpaceX.
Thanks, Sarah. We're glad to be back. Thanks for letting us take Endurance on its shakedown cruise. Looking forward to watching many more flights of Endurance in the future. That was a great ride, and enjoyed working with the NASA and SpaceX team. Thanks for getting us to the space station and back safely.
So they bring us out of the capsule on gurneys, because that's for 6 months. It's hard to stand up. Your muscles and your brain have to re-figure out how to work in gravity, and that's something we can talk about when we're doing questions. And then, just ending with some great views so every day we get to see 16 sunrises and sunsets, because when we orbit the Earth, every 90 minutes we're going around the Earth. And so it's pretty amazing to go to the window and just have, anytime you go by, just amazing views looking down. It's actually pretty hard to figure out where you're at over the Earth. It takes about a month to look at how to recognize the different continents, because they all have very distinctive colors. And you can see the layers of the atmosphere there, so you can see that every time the sun came up and the sun went down. And then at night you can see lightning, you can see the lights. It's a pretty amazing view. So yeah, it was a very fun time, and really enjoyed it. With that, I will stop that. All right, should hopefully have the video back. And yeah, at this point, I am happy to answer whatever questions you guys have, and we'll go from there. So I'll let Maisie pick out some questions, and hopefully we can get to as many as we can.
Oh yeah, we have so many questions. So I'm gonna try again to ask as many as I can, and pick out a lot of them, because some of them are the same questions. So kind of some of the really common questions that I'm seeing, I'm gonna combine a few into like one. And the question that I'm seeing is, what did it feel like to first go to space? So when you were getting ready, were you nervous? Were you excited? And then what did it feel like on your body when you were going into space?
So I think for being nervous, I think, so we've trained so much and spent so much time practicing and rehearsing. So actually, one of the things we do about a month before we actually launch, we start practicing with the exact same people on the flight, when you saw those mission control pictures, the actual people who will be there the day we launch. So even the voices are the same. So if you probably could have fooled me, we have all talked about this, the day of launch, it almost felt like we were doing another simulation. And it wasn't until the engine cut and we were actually floating that it was like, oh yeah, we're actually in, no kidding, we're in space. This isn't a big joke or a big trick, because it was so much like the training. On the launch, you have what's called about 4 or 5 Gs, which means the force of gravity. So if you weigh, if you're a first grader, maybe you weigh like 40 pounds. So it'd be like 200 pounds pushing on your chest while you're going up. And so what that means, it makes it a little harder to breathe, but on the way up, you're in really good shape and your body's used to gravity. So when you fly in a fighter plane, so when I flew in the Air Force, we would pull 9 Gs, and the blood goes down in your head. And so if you ever have seen like pilots and they wear these special pants, like fighter pilots, they have special pants, and they do we breathe differently. We breathe in 3-second increments. We go make it sound like this. And you're trying to push the blood back into your head so you don't pass out. So on launch, it's pushing onto your chest. So you just have to breathe, be very intentional about breathing. The other kind of interesting thing is if you've ever had your hand or your foot fall asleep, when you're on your back and you reach up to push the buttons on the displays, the blood goes out of your hand. And so it tingles, just like that same feeling when your hand falls asleep. So that's how it felt on the way up. On the way down, it was way more exciting. And that's because after 6 months, your body has forgotten what gravity feels like, and your ears, there's fluid in your ears. So when you move your head around like this on the ground, your brain knows what that's doing, and it looks at what your eyes are doing, and it all works because your brain's an amazing thing. But when you come back, your brain doesn't know what to do with all those signals because it's been ignoring them for 6 months. And so as you're under the parachutes and your head's moving around and things are pushing on you, it's very, very disorienting. And actually it's quite common for people to throw up. And that's why you see them taking us out of the capsule. We're not standing up, because when you stand, you get very wobbly and you're very unstable. And so the whole ride back, you still have that pressure on your chest. So that's the same, feels like 4 or 5 people sitting on you. But then you also have the added fun of everything feels like you're in a crazy roller coaster. So I enjoyed the way downhill way better than the way uphill. It was an awesome. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was super fun. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Yes, that does sound very, very cool. I guess another question kind of along those lines is asking what the most difficult part of the adjustment to being back on Earth. Was it that physical adjustment or was it something else?
I think the hardest thing, we do a lot of exercise. So those pictures I was showing you guys in the video, we do like 3 hours of exercise a day, which sounds like a lot of exercise, but it's really not that much because your body doesn't have any force on it the rest of the time. So when we come back, your muscles are pretty well adjusted, but I think the hardest thing to adjust to is balance, and what we call balance is stability. So you might be really strong with your legs and your arms. Like I could pick up a table or pick up a book, but what I couldn't do was balance it very well. So actually, like a really good example, like an iPad was really, really hard for me to hold when I got back, because in space, the iPad has no weight. And so you're used to just holding it on the edge and moving it around. And so it took me a while when I came back to figure out, like, why can't I hold the iPad? And it's so heavy, it's so hard to control. And the same thing, like standing on one leg is really, really hard. Or even if someone, like we don't walk up and down stairs for a little while because you're on one foot at a time when you go up and down stairs, and any of those motions, it's really easy when you first come back to just sort of lose control and just fall over. It's almost like you're a toddler again. So if any of you have like 2- and 3-year-old brothers or sisters, that's basically what we look like when we come back. In fact, they do tests on us to see, like, can you sit down? Can you stand up? Can you lay down and stand up? It's pretty silly, but when you watch us, you see like adults who can't get off the ground because you can't figure out how to do it. So it takes us some time to get used to using our balance again. But it's kind of funny, but also amazing how your brain, how quickly it learns to do it again.
Yeah, brains are super cool that they can figure out a completely different environment, right? So we also have a question asking if you were able to bring anything of yours to space. The specific question asked about books, but we have a couple other questions just asking, could you bring anything of your own belongings?
You could. So you can take about a shoebox size of stuff with you. And so I took things like pictures of my kids. They had made me some drawings. So mostly family related things. I had a few like patches from places I had been in the Air Force, like little pieces of t-shirts and things like that were special to my family. So things like that you can take with you. And then you can also take about 2 shoeboxes worth of special food, or like a care package. And so it has to be food that's safe for space. So it can't be anything or things that would go bad. But maybe if someone wants like peanut butter cups or like barbecue sauce or something that they really like, you could take stuff on that and then use that for some of the food when you got up there.
How cool. Well, so you said you mentioned that you brought, some things to remember your family and your kids drew you pictures. And so some people are wondering, how did you stay in contact with your family who was here on Earth when you were in space?
Yep. So we basically have what's called an IP, or Internet Protocol phone. So we can talk to them pretty much every day. It would depend on, so the way the space station works is if this is the Earth and we're going around it in the space station, there's all their satellites that are also out there. And we have to beam a signal off those other satellites to get to the ground. So if Houston's over here and the space station's on the other side of the Earth, we have to beam this signal through other satellites to get it back down to Houston. So, but most of the time you could do that and call someone. So you could call your family pretty much every day, and it didn't require anyone on the ground to necessarily help you, just had to have the right satellites. And then once a week, we got to do a video call. So basically a Zoom call with our families. And that required much more coordination because the satellites, they only happens very specific times where you can do that. And it takes a lot more, what's called bandwidth, a lot more signal has to go across to have a whole video go down, but that's how we would stay in touch. So once a week I would get to do that. So that's how we did Christmas. So we did, my family opened their presents while I was on the phone with them. And so we would try to do is kind of a different event every week. So I would oftentimes call from a different part of the space station because we'd have to have a computer to do it with us. So once you can't really go around with it. So I would kind of do it from different spots on the space station so they could see the different places where I was working.
Very cool. You also mentioned that maybe you could bring little, certain foods. And so we have quite a few people wondering if you had like a favorite food in space, or does space affect your taste at all?
Yeah, so it definitely does. So on Earth, there's naturally air just always moving around and circulating. And so a lot of your taste comes from it's stimulated with what goes into your nose and what you smell. And so just by moving food close to you, you're actually getting molecules of it up in your nose. And that's part of this experience that your brain has. So in space, that doesn't happen. There's not naturally convection and air moving around. And so all of it's coming through your tongue, and it kind of makes it more bland. And so we use a lot of condiments, which are like seasoning. So a lot of people who don't like spicy food on Earth will put spicy sauces on their food in space just to get more flavor out of it. I think for favorite foods, chocolate and peanut butter were good combos. But we did a lot of, I think my favorite things were things that had a lot of flavor. So we would sometimes, when the cargo vehicles would come up, we'd get fresh fruit or fresh vegetables. And so that was always exciting, because the fresh fruit is very, like having actual juice, like a juicy fruit, because all of our food's dehydrated. That was really special. And then fresh vegetables, because they actually are crisp and they snap. And dehydrated food, it's always just sort of mushy and just melts in your mouth. So having food that actually like a carrot that like breaks off is like a very satisfying taste experience. You don't realize that until you haven't had it for a while, but those were our favorite things.
I will never think about a carrot the same way. I will appreciate the crunch of a carrot next time I eat a carrot. We have a lot of questions about how you sleep in space and how you move around in space, and what does that feel like?
Yeah, so sleeping in space, it takes a while to get used to. So I don't know, I can't see you guys, but I'm sure there's people who've been on roller coasters before, and that feeling you get when you go over the top and you feel like your tummy is coming up inside and you're falling, that's the feeling you have when you first get to space. And you are actually falling. You're falling constantly. You're just never hitting the ground. And then you've probably also had the feeling sometimes when you're getting tired at night, you're starting to fall asleep and your arm moves, your leg moves, and you wake up and you have this like weird dream that you were falling. Well, that's what happened in space. The first 2 or 3 days, whenever you close your eyes, you feel like you're falling. So it's almost impossible to actually fall asleep, because your brain thinks you're falling and you can't sleep. I mean, if you could go try it, well, don't go off a hightail, but like if you go roll off your bed and try to fall asleep while you're falling, it won't work very well. And so your brain just refuses to let you sleep. So we actually take, it's very common for people to take medication to help sleep the first few days. And then your brain eventually, we were talking about how amazing your brain is, eventually figures out like, oh, I can ignore this. You're not actually falling. And then it's totally natural. It's actually probably the best sleep I've gotten in my life, because there's no pressure on any part of your body. It's like the ultimate waterbed. There's no hot spots. There's nothing pushing on you. And the way we sleep, so we have what's called crew quarters. I know I'm trying to stay in the field of view. So it's basically a closet, and you're up against the wall in a sleeping bag. And so the sleeping bag's bungeed to the wall, and then you're in the sleeping bag like this, or with your hands hanging out, but there's straps across you. And different people do different things. Some people like to be really tight in the sleeping bag. Some people, like I had my legs out, my arms out, and just my torso restrained. Some people don't like to be restrained at all. They just like to kind of float around, but you're sleeping inside. It's like a closet, like a small closet. And it's basically just big enough for you to go inside. There's a computer in there, but that's also our office. It's our office and our sleeping area. And then there's a door that you close, and that way it stays dark and you don't hear the noise outside the station. So that's where you sleep. Most people put in earplugs because the noise, the station's always very loud. There's lots of fans and machinery. And then you strap yourself in and go to sleep.
That is very, very cool. Maybe I'm feeling a little jealous that I don't get to sleep in weightlessness.
Yeah, it's amazing. And when you come back and try to sleep the first time in a bed, it's very painful, because you're like, you are very aware of force all over your body again, and you've gotten used to sleeping with no force anywhere on you, and it's very relaxing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like speaking of having no force, I think we touched on this a little bit, but maybe go into a little bit more detail because I'm getting a lot of questions about what you have to do to keep your body and your muscles healthy and strong in space.
Yeah. So what happens is it's the same thing if you have maybe parents or friends or someone that you know has been in the hospital for a really long time. After your body is, again, it's super amazing and your brain's amazing. So after about 7 to 14 days, with just like a week or two, your body realizes there's no load on it. There's nothing pushing you down. So just you sitting here on the Zoom call, us talking, like my neck muscles are having to hold my head up. They're having to hold that weight. My spine is having to hold my body up. My butt muscles are having to like push into the chair. So my body is like doing all these things, and I'm not exercising, but it is holding a load. But in space, none of those things are there. So it's just like being in a hospital for 14 days, laying on a bed. Your body really quickly says like, oh, I have too much bone. I don't need all this bone. And it starts to get rid of it. And so you actually start to pee out calcium, which is your bones thinning, and you start peeing it out of your body. And so we have to exercise. We do weight training. So we do a lot of training that exercises our low back and our hips, because those are the things that are used to getting loaded all the time on the ground that aren't being in space. So we do tons and tons of what's called squats. So if you guys haven't been prior to a weight room, I hope if you're in first grade, but like you have a bar and you do like these things, you do a lot of deadlifts where you're lifting up big weights. So you're doing a whole lot of exercise trying to make your hips and your back and your shoulders think that there's gravity. And then we do that like an hour and a half a day. And then the hour and a half, we use the treadmill or a bike. And that's trying to get our cardio, our heart, to stay healthy. And the reason that happens is because when you're in space, just like if you lay down or if you do a headstand for a while, you can feel all the blood go to your head. And so in space, it's like you're laying down all the time. And so your heart can get lazy basically because it doesn't have to pump blood up into your head. It just floats around inside you. And so we have to do this cardio exercise to keep our heart healthy so that when we come back, it still has the strength to push blood up against gravity up into our head, into our brain. So yeah, we spend about 3 hours a day exercising, but those other 21 hours a day, you're recovering. We're doing work, but your body is carrying no load. So it's like an amazing, you can do very, very intense workouts in space that you could do on the ground, but on the ground after that same workout, you'd have to take like 2 or 3 days off. You'd have to recover. But in space, by the next day, you feel fine again.
Oh, cool. A few people are wondering if people can get sick in space and like if there is, something scary that happens or if there is like a medical emergency, what happens?
Yep. So we all actually get trained in medical response. So there's 3 big emergencies we train for on the space station. One's a fire, one's a depress, or means like a leak or a hole, and one's an ammonia or a toxic atmosphere. So we use ammonia to cool things, and ammonia is a toxic substance to people. So those are the 3 emergencies we train for. And then the 4th, it's medical stuff. Any kind of medical trauma or something that requires medical intervention. So what we get trained on, we can do dental procedures. We can do defibrillation, which is basically like for someone who has a heart attack. We can put in an airway for someone, whether like what's called a trach, or intubate someone. So most of what we can do is just to stabilize someone. What we definitely can't do in space is surgery. We can't actually like cut someone open or do some kind of surgical procedure. We'd have to get them back to the ground. So all of our training is essentially done on the assumption like get the person stable, get them back in the capsule, and we'd have to come back home and then get them to a doctor. Tom Marshburn, who was on my crew, he was actually a doctor and a physicist, a medical doctor. So we relied a lot on his training. And there's actually several astronauts at NASA that have medical backgrounds, that are doctors. And that's an important thing as we look to going to the moon to stay or go to Mars, some kind of medical experience, because it's a really good question. Like what happens if someone breaks a bone or something like that, because you're moving around really heavy equipment. And if you got your hand stuck behind something, behind a 1-ton piece of equipment, it could snap your arm really easily if you're not thinking about that, because you get used to things moving so easily. So we do have to think about that. And then for getting sick, that's the reason we are so careful about even before COVID was even a thing, we've always quarantined before and after flight for exactly that reason, because we don't want any viruses to get onto the space station, because we don't want to have to come home if someone gets really sick. So let's say you've got a cold, that'd probably be okay, but if that cold turned into pneumonia or something like that, you'd have to come home. And having a cold in space is really unpleasant, because just being in space the first few days, you feel like you have a cold, because all the fluid in your body moves up into your head. So if you've seen astronauts on videos, you saw like my face in that video looked different than now. My cheeks were more puffy, my head's bigger, and so the fluid in your body fills up, and so you actually feel like you're stuffed up. And you actually are. You have fluid in the same place, like when you have a cold, it feels like you have a cold. And so if you actually have a real cold on top of that, it's miserable, and you really can't even work. And so that's the big reason we have to be really, really careful about not only the people that go to the space station, but all the stuff that comes up, like all that food I was talking about, the supplies, cargo. They have to all go through a clean room. They have to be super careful about not getting any viruses or even bugs, like little flies or mosquitoes, or anything like that into space would be bad.
Yeah. All right, I am seeing a lot of questions now. I think we've talked a little bit about like what it's like for you and your body being in space. So I'm going to shift a little bit, because we have a lot of questions about spacewalks, and so what keeps you attached during your spacewalk, and whether you can feel the temperature, whether it's cold out there, those kind of questions about your spacewalk experience.
That's probably the hardest thing that we train for, and the hardest thing we do are spacewalks. And so it takes about to do a full spacewalk takes about 14 hours. We're usually only out in space for about 7 hours, and the reason that the time limit has to do with the carbon dioxide that we exhale. And so in that backpack we have is a system that removes, or we call it scrubs, carbon dioxide out of what we exhale. And it's a system that runs it through this chemical reaction, but you only have between like 7 to 8 hours of that. And so that's why you have to come back inside. The temperature question is a really good one, and that's why why the spacesuit's so amazing. So when you're on the dark side of the Earth, what we call eclipse, when the sun's not shining on you, it's like minus 200, 300 degrees, like super, super cold. When you're in the insolation, we call it, or when the sun's shining on you, then it's super, super hot, like 300 or 400 degrees above zero. So it's a swing of like 500 to 600 degrees, depending on what side of the Earth you're on. And you're going through that every 45 minutes, it's changing. And so we are very aware, as part of the training, is we know on each spacewalk like what we call them, like the touch temp hazards are, because the stuff on the outside of the station is changing temperatures. And you want to make sure that maybe your gloves, you don't grab onto something that's super heated. And we'd have in our gloves, we have heaters. So when you're in the cold side, you turn on these heaters to keep your fingers warm. And then you have a dial on your chest that changes the amount of fluid running through your suit that's keeping you cold. And then when you're in the sun, you turn the cooling up and you turn off the glove heaters. So, but the suit's pretty amazing. If you think about your house, if your house could have insulation that worked across 500 degrees, it's a pretty phenomenal thing that it does that. And it's really no effort for us. You don't have to use those heaters or cooling. You can just keep working and it works just fine. And then how we stay attached, it's very much like mountain climbing. So you always have a tether, and that's one of the biggest things we hammer in training over and over and over again is all the tether protocols. And so there's different rules about what types of things you can attach to, how many attachments you need. When you see, like I think you saw in that video, there's all these hooks flying around my head. So because not only do we have to stay tethered, all the things we're working on have to stay tethered. So like the screwdriver I'm using, the wrench, the thing we're replacing, all those things have to have tethers on them, because if you let go of it, it's gone. And now the spacewalk's a failure because you don't have the thing you need to work on. So we have all these, we call them rets, it's basically a hook with a string on it. And we have this basically a toolbox attached to our chest. And then we have tethers for our body. They're down by our hips. They're kind of attached down here. And we use those to attach onto the space station. We always have two tethers. We have one that's called a safety tether, and that's got a giant retractable reel, and we can get about 85 feet, and in theory, it should pull us back if we were to let go. And then we have another one that's only about this long. It's called a local tether, and when you get close to whatever you're working on, you put that one down. But you are always we're always checking where the tethers are, because the other thing that can happen with the tethers can get twisted in them. And because they're these long cables, and the cables just float around in space. So it's very common to get tangled in a cable. And so we train. That's part of the reason we train so much, is always thinking about, where's my tether, like where's the cable, and keeping track of that throughout the spacewalk.
People also have a question about the different kinds of spacesuits that they saw. So, you were in one spacesuit when you left Earth and came back to Earth, and you weren't in anything while you were in the space station. So can you explain a little bit about
absolutely.
purposes
So
of each one?
the white suits you saw at the beginning and the end are what's called the launch and entry suits. And so that's what we wear in the SpaceX Dragon vehicle. So our Dragon was named Endurance. So that's only for launch and entry. You can't do a spacewalk in those. And so what those suits are meant to do is, like, if the spacecraft had a hole in it, those suits would inflate, and they're very rigid. So they would keep us safe long enough for us to come back and splash down, but we wouldn't be able to move around in them. You're basically stuck in the seat, because you're like a marshmallow man. So if you move your hands forward, they'll like pop up, and then you can't actually move anymore. So it's almost like once you guys have all your like cold weather gear on in the winter here, and you're like just sort of like waddling around. It's the same thing. So you keep your hands in, and there's just enough reach that you can still reach the displays and control the vehicle and keep and stay safe. On the space station itself, inside the space station, so I mentioned like the whole space station is about as big as a football field. The part we live in is about like a 4 or 5 bedroom house, but inside that part, it's a constant, it's 70 degrees, and you just wear normal clothes inside the space station. And then the other suit is what we call the EMU, or the extravehicular mobility unit, which is the fancy word for a spacesuit. And so that's what we use for what we call EVAs, which is extravehicular activity or spacewalk. So we use those suits for spacewalks, and they were specifically designed. You can move your arms, you can turn your body. You couldn't walk in those on the ground though. Like those suits weigh about 500 pounds. So when we train on them in the NBL, they actually hold them at the pool. They hold them on this rack, because if you try to put it on yourself, you'd fall over. It's so heavy. But in space, they don't weigh anything. So it's basically like it is a mini spaceship. It's your own personal spaceship that you get inside and fly around in. And then that is the one we do spacewalks in, but it's not useful. It's not very like flexible or mobile. So you wouldn't be able to get into and out of a Dragon capsule in that spacesuit. It's very bulky and too big. And I forgot to mention in the previous answer that the third way we have to stay attached, if your tethers, like if you screw up your tethers on a spacewalk or you get detached, in that backpack there is a nitrogen jet system. So you have about like 30 to 50 seconds of time, like of propulsion. Like if, let's say you like, oh my gosh, I got disconnected, I'm floating away from the space station, you can actually activate this jet system and then fly yourself back to the station. But that's a pretty dicey, not a great scenario, but there is that as a backup.
Very cool. So another question that I'm seeing a lot is kind of related to like how fast you're going. So when you are in the space station, you're in orbit, but you're also, you're moving, right? So people are wondering, first, how fast you're going in the space station. And I'm also seeing a lot of questions about how fast you are going when you are getting to the space station. Like, how long does it take?
Yep. Yeah. So we're going a few different numbers. In the orbit we're going about 17,000, 18,000 miles per hour, or Mach 25 is another way to measure that. When we are going up and down, that's another term would be like 5 miles a second, something like that. 6 miles a second. And on the way up, it takes about, from the time we start on the launch pad, the time we're going that fast is about 8 minutes. So it happens pretty quickly. Very similarly on the way down, when we deorbit, we basically are slowing down and falling back to the ground. So one common thing, I don't have a globe here, but I'll use my hand. All right, sorry. So if this is the Earth, a lot of people think that our orbit's like way out here, like, you know, we're way far away from the Earth, which there are satellites that are out there, like the satellites that look at our weather, or like they give you some of your cable, things like that. There are satellites out there, but actually we're way down here. We're just a hair. So we're 200 miles up, but the Earth is 7,000 miles. So at 200 miles is not very much. And so we're actually just above. And then the other thing, you know, so the rocket comes up off the Earth, and then it turns this way and starts accelerating. And like I said before, we're falling the whole time, but it's just we're going so fast this way that we never touch the ground. So we're always falling. Oh, thanks. I've got a prop bed here. All right. So yeah, our orbit is just over the Earth. And that's why, and so how high you are depends on how fast you're going. So the lower you are, the faster you're going around the Earth. So we're going around every 90 minutes. Whereas the ones that are way out here it actually takes more energy to get up there, but you're not going as fast around the Earth. So there's kind of a long way to answer the question, but the easy one is about 6 miles a second.
That sounds super fast. Sounds real fast. So another question we have, once you are back down on Earth, a lot of people are wondering why you land in the water.
Great question. So it's because they basically, the landing field, I'd mentioned Tom flew in a Soyuz, they land on the land, and they have little jets that fire right before it hits the ground. And it feels like being in a car crash, like a 30-mile-per-hour car crash. Our landing, I would say, feels like someone pushed you in the back, and you weren't expecting them to push you in the back. Like they surprised you and you got pushed, and you would fall over, but you probably wouldn't hit your head. You'd probably just like land on your hands and knees and be like, whoa, what just happened? That was sort of the feeling you get. But the reason we land on water is because it's a softer landing than on land. And so if you could guarantee that you're gonna land in a nice, like lush, green, freshly sodded plot of land, then that'd probably be okay. But the problem when you land on land is you don't know if like maybe the slope, maybe you land on a hill, maybe you land on some trees, maybe you land on some rocks. And so the bottom of your capsule, the bottom of the SpaceX capsule is not designed for that. It's got a heat shield, and SpaceX reuses their capsule. And so they don't want, it doesn't want to hit the ground and you damage it. The Boeing vehicle does land on land. It has giant airbags. So the same kind of airbags it would be if anyone hopefully hasn't been in a serious accident, but if you've ever seen the airbags come out of your car, it's like that, except huge, like the size of your car, giant airbags that come out on the bottom of the capsule when it lands on land. But there's different design approaches. Boeing reuses their capsule too. So both have come up with different ways to do it, but the SpaceX one lands in the water.
And you know what? You actually answered another question that I was going to follow up. I've had a few that said, what happens to the capsule when once you've landed? And it sounds like it's reused.
Yeah, so you actually saw those pictures at the very end. It looked all like a brown toasty marshmallow on the outside, which it kind of is, like a burnt marshmallow. And they basically refurbish all that. That's all meant to happen. It's called ablative, which is a fancy word that means it's supposed to fall apart and burn as it comes in. But the Endurance capsule is actually in space right now. The one that's attached to the space station is the same one that we landed in May. So actually kind of funny, about the same time it takes me to recover and get back to normal health and strength is about the same time it takes them to fix the capsule. But Crew 5 is up there now, and they flew Endurance on its second flight.
Wow, that is super cool. That how quickly that seems to happen. Wow.
And the rockets they recycle like in a week, so they can reuse a rocket in about a week after it's launched.
Wow, that really surprises me. That's incredible to me. All right, so we have just a few minutes left, and I'm getting a lot of questions about whether or not you might be going back to space, or if you would like to. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So I think absolutely the only reason I was excited to come home was family. Otherwise, if I hadn't had family and missed my kids and wife and the rest of my friends and family, I would have stayed up there indefinitely. And pretty much as soon as we got back, we were all like, okay, we're ready to go back. If they could figure out a way to get family up there, I think that would solve the problem. Yeah. So I don't really have insight into how long generally there's a decent amount of time, at least like a year or two before you're even eligible to go back again. Part of that's because of the radiation dosing we get. And so we're exposed to higher amounts of radiation when we're in space. And so from a ethical standpoint, we can't really, it's not really in the best health interest to send someone back very quickly, depending on how long they were up there. So that's one reason. The other reason is we've got we've got 43 active astronauts, and we've got multiple different programs. And so we've got Artemis, which is the program to go on the moon. We've got the SpaceX vehicle. We've got the Boeing vehicle. So there's 3 different vehicles. We have the Soyuz. So there's 4 basically training flows that we're trying to maintain in various states. And really the real answer is our real job. Like part of our job is to go to space, but our real job is using our experience to help with the programs at NASA. So whether it's the various science and engineering ones, there's, like I said, Artemis is the big one right now. So most of our office is helping with design and testing of whether it's the Orion capsule, the SLS rocket, the Gateway, which was going to be the station around the moon. So everyone's kind of involved doing those things, and that's kind of our day job. And then at some point when they need people to fly and it's your turn, like, okay, now go start training for that. So yes, I hope to fly again, but it's probably at least years time frame.
Gotcha. Yeah. And a lot of people are wondering too, I think a lot of us have heard that, there's only so much time someone can spend in space. So how much time is that?
It depends. That's a really complicated answer. I would need some graphs to show it, but the short answer is it depends. So the rule is that basically we as the government, so we're government employees, and even if we weren't government employees, just what's the right thing to do as a person is you shouldn't expose someone to so much radiation that they would die, that they would potentially die earlier from maybe getting cancer. And so you have to weigh that risk. So it changes because the older you get, and this sounds kind of weird, but the older you get, the more likely you are to die anyways. And so the radiation exposure level changes as your age changes, and it also changes based on the type of radiation you get. So the radiation you get on the way to the moon or Mars is way different than the radiation we get in low Earth orbit. It depends on how long you got the radiation, and it depends on how old you were when you got the radiation. So there's this complicated algorithm. So it's not a very cut and dry answer. And even then there's some pretty big wiggle room because we don't have a whole lot of data. We don't have many people who've lived outside low Earth orbit. So we really don't know. We just are pretty sure it's not great. But we also have a lot of things that are designed for Artemis to protect humans from radiation. So, and we actually carry the whole time we're up there. I have what's called a dosimeter that it both in my sleeping bag and I carry with me. And so they have a model of how much radiation they think I got. They have what I actually got. We take them out on our spacewalk. So they're very, very conscious of how much radiation we have and trying to come up with the right balance of risk versus operational, like getting things done.
Gotcha. All right, so we have 2 minutes left, but I want to ask one final question, which is, what is your favorite thing about your job and being an astronaut?
My favorite thing, I think, two, I'm gonna say two, because one in space and one on the ground. In space is floating, just like being able to float. It's not kind of like, it's like superhero power. You just like go where you want. It was so annoying coming back to Earth and having to walk. I was really put out because I'd gotten used to in space, I could wait until like 15 seconds before I had to do something and just like fly through the station. You got really good at just like grabbing the handrail and turning the corner. I'm like, boom, I'm ready. And now on the Earth, I have to think like, I gotta go to the bathroom. That's gonna take me a minute. Like, what a pain. I gotta get up and walk over there. And instead of just like pushing off and being there. So that's my favorite thing in space. I think one of my favorite parts of the job on the ground, honestly, is actually doing school, like being able to talk to schools. Because I think I have young kids myself. And so it's always really exciting. It's not as fun on Zoom when I don't get to see the kids, but that's really fun for me I like talking about my job and I'm excited about space. So it's really exciting for me when I get to go meet kids and talk to them.
Well, I'm so glad that you are so excited to talk about space, because we were so excited to have you. Based on all of the incredible questions that we got, I would say that our audience is also very excited to have spent the last hour with you. I know there were, to the people who joined us, there were so many questions that we weren't able to answer, but I do know there are so many great resources online to learn more about it. You can always go to the NASA website. And you'll be able to hopefully have some of your questions answered there.
Yeah. And for the teachers, if you go to nasa.gov, I think in the top right, there's an audiences tab, and then under, it's either audiences or educators, but it actually breaks it down. There's like K through 2, where you can actually click on different age groups and it'll bring up specific things for those age groups.
Perfect. Awesome. So I want to thank you so much. Thank our astronaut Raja. Thank you for joining us. And thank our audience as well. Thank everyone who's joined us and asked such incredible questions. I'm really glad that we got a chance to learn so much from Raja today, and remind everybody that this is a series that we do. If you want to learn more about the next expert that we talk to, please sign up for our educator newsletter. If you're on YouTube, you can find that link on the description. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks. See you.